Hello everyone and welcome to our lesson on measures of central tendency. This is section 13.5. Another word for central tendency is going to be average. And an average is a number representative of a group of data. So basically we can have a whole big set of data, and an average is going to be one single number that we could use to represent all of the pieces of data. Now, we have four different averages. The one you're most familiar with is probably the mean. We also have something called the median. We have a mode, and then also a mid-range. Now, it turns out that each average could be different, but will lie somewhere near the middle of all the data. Hence, measures of central tendency. Hence, measures of central tendency. So the first one we want to talk about is the mean. And the mean is the sum of all data divided by the number of pieces of data. Now we have two different symbols to represent mean. One is X bar, and it's read X bar. It's just a little X with a bar on top. And it's used when the mean of a sample is calculated. So X bar works with a sample. And the other symbol is this one right here. It's a little Greek symbol, and we read it mu. And this is used when the mean of an entire population is calculated. So here's the mean formula. So X bar equals, well, we got this little E thing right here. And basically what this means is the sum of all data values, and then divided by n, where n is the number of pieces of data. And I put this scale here because the average is the balancing point of all the data. Okay, now this is very often used to calculate your grades, so you have some idea about means already. The next one we want to talk about is the median. And the piece of data that is in the exact middle of all the data is the median. So to find the median, the data must be ranked, and that just means it needs to be in order. If there are an even number of pieces of data, the median will be exactly in between the two middle pieces. So in this case, it may not be an actual piece of data, but it's going to be the average of the two middle pieces, or the mean of the two middle pieces. Now, to find the median, there will be an equal amount of pieces of data on either side of the median. So notice it's another measure of central tendency. It's going to be in the center because it has half the data on one side and half the data on the other side. The next one we're going to talk about is the mode. And the mode is the piece of data that occurs the most. And this one is going to have the highest frequency. It's another way of saying the most. Now it turns out there can't be more than one mode. So if one piece of data doesn't occur more than all the rest, then there is no mode. So in other words, if there's a tie for the most, then we would say no mode. Now this one is least likely to be in the center of the data always. And the reason is it just happens to occur the most. So if most of the students get 100%, okay, it's going to be right at the top rather than in the middle. So this one's kind of a little bit harder to think of as a central tendency, but it is still another type of average. Our next one is the mid-range, and this is the halfway point between the highest and the lowest value. So it's like finding the mean of the highest and the lowest value. So to find the mid-range, you just take the lowest data plus the highest piece of data, and you divide it by 2. And that's going to give you a value that's somewhere in the middle of all the data, right in between the highest and the lowest. So we've talked about this a little bit, but I want to make sure you get this, that ranked data. This is data that has been put in order from lowest to highest, and it's very helpful when we're looking at these measures of central tendency to have ranked data. One other thing that we can talk about is a percentile. What a percentile does, these divide a set of data into equal parts. And each percentile shows how many pieces of data are above and below it, or what percent of data is above and below it. So for example, the 78th percentile means, well, that piece of data would be above 78% of all the data and below 22% of all the data. This is almost like when you're doing standardized tests and they would give you a percentile. So if you scored in the 90th percentile, that means you scored better than 90% of all other test takers and worse than 10% of all other test takers. Okay? Notice 90th percentile does not mean that you got a 90% on the test. It just compares you with the rest of the data. Now we also have things called quartiles, and this divides all the data into quarters. So the 25th percentile we also call quartile 1. The 50th percentile we call quartile 2, and this is also the median, okay, because it's right in the middle. And then the 70th or 75th percentile we call quartile 3. Okay, and here's a little graph that illustrates that. Here's Q1, Q2, which is also the median, and then Q3. And you can see 25% of the data here, 25% here, 25% here, 25% here. And notice at the median that we have 50% of the data below it and 50% of the data above it. All right, so that is percentiles. All right, so for our first example, we want to be able to find all 4 measures of central tendency, the mean, median, mode, and mid-range for the following set of data, 1, 4, 6, 8, 9, 8, 3, 3, and 5. So first, let's deal with the mean. So the mean, what we want to do is sum up all the pieces of data. So we just want to add all these up here. Okay, and then we want to divide up by how many pieces of data there are. Well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pieces of data. So we're going to divide by 9. Now if you do this in your calculator, make sure that you take the entire sum of the top before dividing by 9. And when you do this, you should get about 5.2 repeating. So this is the mean of that set of data. Next, let's take a look at the median. Now for median, remember, we're looking for the middle of ranked data. So we need to put this data in order. So the smallest number here is 1. Then we have a 3 and another 3. Then we have a 4. Then we have a 5, then a 6, then we have, looks like, 2 8s, and we have a 9. So just make sure all the pieces of data are accounted for, and we want to put them in order from least to greatest. Now, median stands for middle. So we want to find the middle number. And one way you can do this is by starting on either end and crossing off the values. So we're narrowing in closer to the center when we do this. So cross off 1 on the left and 1 on the right, 1 on the left, 1 on the right, and then whatever is left in the exact middle is your median. Okay, so here our median is the number 5. Now some other ways that you can think of this is if we have 9 pieces of data and we want to split this dead in half, we would say we want number, well, 4.5. So it's 4.5 from the left and 4.5 from the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half. 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half. And so we get this right here in the middle. Now notice when there are an odd number of pieces of data, that the median will actually be a piece of data. Okay, it's the one right there in the center. All right, next let's take a look at mode, and we remember that mode means most. So when we look at this data over here, we want to see which one has the highest frequency. There's only 1 1, 1 4, we have 1 6, we have 2 8s, we only have 1 9, and we have 2 3s, and we have 1 5. So if we had a frequency distribution, this would be a lot easier to see. But when we look at this, the number 3 occurs 2 times, and the number 8 occurs 2 times. Now, when there's a tie like this, we actually say that there is no mode. Okay, so when we mean most, we mean most. And so because there's a tie, we have no mode. So next we want to talk about the mid-range, and this is the middle of the range of data. So we want to add the high and the low and divide it by 2. So here, the highest number is 9, and then the lowest number is 1. So to find the mid-range, we just do 9 plus 1 divided by 2, and that's 10 over 2, which equals 5. So here is 5. Okay, so you'll notice here that the mean, median, mode, and mid-range don't all have to be the same number. And that is how it works with measures of central tendency. They're all different ways of finding one number that's representative of the entire sample of numbers. All right, for the next example, I want you to give this a try on your own. Go ahead and pause the video and then come on back when you're done to check your work. All right, welcome back. So go ahead and take a look at your work here. You should have gotten 10.3 for the mean, 9.5 for the median, and notice how we dealt with, we had an even amount of numbers. That means in the middle we actually get two numbers, 9 and 10. And so what we want to do there is add them up and divide by 2, so we take the average of the two middle numbers to get 9.5. So that happens when we have an even number of pieces of data. For the mode, again, 10 had 2 and 16 had 2, so there was a tie, so there was no mode. And for the mid-range, the high was 27 and the low was 1, so 27 plus 1 over 2, and you should have gotten 14 right there. All right, I want you to go ahead and answer these questions about percentiles here on your own, and then we'll check your answers together in class. All right, so that is 13.5, measures of central tendency.